International Women's Day, we celebrate the power and potential of women and girls. We recognize their courage, resilience, and leadership. We mark the ways in which we are making progress towards a more gender-equal world. At the same time, we see how that progress is being undermined by multiple interlocking and compounding generational crises. Currently, we are witnessing the horrifying situation in Ukraine, where the impacts on women and girls, including the hundreds of thousands displaced, remind us that all conflicts, from Ukraine to Myanmar to Afghanistan, from the Sahel to Yemen, exact their highest price from women and girls. The Secretary General has been clear: war must stop. Recently, we have seen the impact of COVID-19 in increasing inequalities, driving poverty and violence against women and girls, and rolling back their progress in employment, health, and education. The accelerating crises of climate change and environmental degradation are disproportionately undermining the rights and well-being of women and girls. They are multiplying insecurity at all levels, from individual and household to national. Rising temperatures, extending droughts, violent storms, and floods are resulting in loss of livelihoods, depleting resources, and fueling migration and displacement. The latest major IPCC report on climate change and our Secretary General have warned us that nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone now, and that many ecosystems are at the point of no return now. Climate change is a threat multiplier, but women, and especially young women, are solution multipliers. We have today the opportunity to put women and girls at the center of our planning and action, and to integrate gender perspectives into global and national laws and policies. We have the opportunity to rethink, reframe, and reallocate resources. We have the opportunity to benefit from the leadership of women and girls environmental defenders and climate activists to guide our planet's conservation. We need Indigenous women's intergenerational knowledge, practices, and skills. It will take unprecedented levels of global cooperation and solidarity to succeed. But there is no alternative to success. We must protect our hard-won gains on human rights and women's rights, and lead decisively to leave no woman or girl behind. We have a blueprint to follow. It involves women's full and equal participation and leadership in decision-making, their access to green jobs and the blue economy, their equal access to finance and resources. We need to ensure universal social protection and a care economy that protects us all. We have to scale up financing for gender-responsive climate, environmental and disaster risk initiatives, including for COVID-19 recovery, and to increase resilience to future shocks. The solution is there. We must resolve to pursue it. Let us make this International Women's Day a moment to recall that we have the answers, not just for SDG 5, but through the advancement of gender equality for all 17 SDG goals and Agenda 2030. I look forward to working with every one of you to that end, and I thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, our live speaker today, and that is Safia Yonis, Associate Manager or Associate Program Management Officer for Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit of UN Habitat in East Africa. Safia holds a master's in human rights law from the School of Oriental African Studies in London. She worked for the African Union for Peace and Security Issues as well. Welcome, Safia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Very good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all. First and foremost, I'd really like to thank the organizers for inviting me to take part in this event. I'm honored to be here today in the presence of such amazing and inspiring and extraordinary women. The celebration of International Women's Day provides an opportunity and a chance to honor the contributions of women to society, while also bringing attention to the continued fight for equality. As you all know, this year's theme is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, a global call to arms to combat discrimination, celebrate our differences, and build a future of equality. It offers an opportunity to reflect on progress made, to call for change, and to celebrate acts of courage and determination by women who have played an extraordinary role in the advancement of gender equality around the world. It's no secret that women have been and continue to be trailblazers in the effort to build a better and more equal world for everyone, from the early pioneers to the current potent agents of change. However, we have a long ways to go before we can call ourselves truly equal. That said, we can all start by doing our part as a community, by educating women on their basic rights and empowering them to build inclusive and safe workplaces, raising awareness of women who are contributing to digital and technological advancements that are innovating the world and encouraging equality. We can appreciate and increase the visibility of female creative work and raise awareness of women's health to ensure that women are able to make educated and sensible decisions regarding their health and their bodies. Similarly, we can celebrate the accomplishments and contributions of women in science who are working on the COVID-19 vaccine and the overall COVID-19 emergency response, as well as the role women are playing in providing evidence-based research to inform policymaking on sustainable food systems, air quality control, climate change, and the environment as a whole. We can't ignore the fact that people are both the cause and the solution when it comes to climate change. In this regard, vulnerable communities and women who are most affected by climate issues must be included in this discussion if climate action mitigation is to be gained, accepted, visible, and efficient. We at UN Habitat are committed to supporting cities and human settlements, their inhabitants, and other local stakeholders as crucial implementers of climate action. And we will continue to do our part by contributing to gender responsive and inclusive climate adaptation and mitigation. This year, as we commemorate International Women's Day, let us all remember that we can actively choose to question stereotypes, fight biases, broaden perceptions, improve situations, and honor women's achievements by changing our own individual ideas and behaviors as well. Therefore, as we collectively have a role to play in encouraging women to pursue their goals and aspirations, regardless of societal biases or obstacles, and in doing so, each one of us can help create a gender equal world. Thank you very much once again for having me.
Thank you so much, Safia. We now have two International Women's Day messages. The first one from Dr. Vasudha Sharma, who's the best-selling author of Why She Must Lead. And then Wendy Sung Ad, Executive Director for Girls E-Mentorship, otherwise known as GEM in Toronto.
Ozan, can you play the videos, please? Thank you.
I believe
Ozan,
that's the video of Emma Stevens that's coming up. The two videos we're looking for is Dr. Vasudha Sharma and Wendy Sung Ad.
I would
Why
like to
don't
look for those. Can we play this first?
Okay,
Okay.
please increase the volume.
Before I continue, because I am doing it on my phone and in my bedroom. So, but I'm happy to be here on International Women's Day, and I would like to thank everybody for having me. Doug, I chose a very special song for today. It is a women empowerment song for all the women who are struggling, who are taking care of children on their own or with spouses, for women who are just having a hard time being alone, a woman who lost a loved one, a woman who is having a hard time in life. It's just for us in Indigenous women to empower each other. And with this song, it's called the Strong Woman Song. So the Strong Woman Song is about strong women. And before I get into the song, I wanted to talk a little bit about the MMIW project, the movement that is going on in Canada. So when I was up in the UN, I did a little speech about it, but a lot more has happened with the children that have been found at residential schools. The movement has also gone up with recognition. A lot more people are noticing, which is very good. If you can support the movement, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement, it would be very helpful. We wrote a song, me and Carter Chesson, who is usually my guitarist, who couldn't do this with me, but that's okay. He wrote that song, and it's about missing and murdered Indigenous women. It tells a story when you listen to it, and the whole music video is all of a story about a young woman, a young Indigenous woman, and she has a fight with her mother, and she goes off and she becomes a murdered Indigenous woman. And it hurts, but you know, we gotta give light to all of that. So on this day, I want to do this very powerful song for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy. I just want to say thank you one more time, and I hope you guys enjoy your night. And I would like to say thank you and numultus, which means goodbye.
Oh, always catches me. So that was Emma Stevens of the Kamak Nation. And they're a performer for their nation. And that was her song of Strong Women's song. So our next speaker, okay, it looks like we have the other videos queued up now. So the first video is Dr. Vasudha Sharma, author of Why She Must Lead. And then the second video that will follow will be Wendy Sung Ad, Executive Director for Girls E-Mentorship.
Good morning, His Excellency Urban Economy Chair Reza Purveziri, distinguished members and guests. On this beautiful day to celebrate women, I would like to congratulate the Urban Economy Forum for partnering with World Urban Campaign, coordinated by UN Habitat, to organize Urban Thinker Campus focused towards gender equality, sexual violence, safer cities, and women in leadership. I've belonged to various groups of women throughout my life. As a young woman in developing country, as an immigrant woman, as a woman of color, as a woman who want to fight for equity, I realize the diversity of my experiences as I share my thoughts on this platform today. I would like to highlight the importance of exchange of knowledge and ideas by engaging in dialogues in addressing urbanization challenges and finding and proposing solutions to reimagine sustainable urban development in the interest of women and girls' equality in North America and globally. I dream of seeing women of color and indigenous women fairly represented in leadership around the world. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for top jobs based on mere identity. I genuinely believe in a fair, merit-based system. But unfortunately, that's not all it takes for women of color to advance. They must face not a glass, but a concrete ceiling with multiple layers of challenges before reaching the top. When we compare the United States to the rest of the world, the difference is widening between American women and their counterparts in the peer nation. The United States is ranked 26th in women's economic participation and opportunity and 86th in women political empowerment. Bringing attention to these numbers is essential. We need to identify the barrier, biases, lack of mentorship and sponsorship in modern workplaces affecting women. Cities and workplaces need to invest in resources for discovering and building advocacy for women. Women as a group is not monolithic. The cause of underrepresentation at top position also vary. To write my book, I've used curated reports to show the facts and figures to highlight the disparity in opportunities. But more data and research is needed on how gender and race affect advancement and growth. Women constitute a majority of US population, and yet they lag significantly behind men in leadership position. Gender equality is still a goal in this mighty nation. The world's highest ceiling is still not shattered, and we have yet to welcome a female president. When we face a challenge as massive as inequality, systemic and structural racism, and sexism, we have to work with full force. We need to unite to complete the circle as we move towards inclusion, equity, and breaking the concrete ceiling. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on a topic that is close to my heart. I hope we have more platforms like this where we can have an open dialogue and continue with momentum towards our collective goal.
Hi, I'm Wendy Sung Ad, Executive Director of a charitable organization called Girls E-Mentorship, based here in Toronto, Canada. First, I want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. This March 8th marks my 21st year in celebrating the day, the week, and the month. It's absolutely wonderful to see so many people now celebrating and recognizing all the wonderful accomplishments we've made in terms of gender equality, but also recognizing that we still have a long way to go. Gender equality today is absolutely essential for a sustainable tomorrow. Women's rights are human rights. Women's rights are also children's rights. So to everyone out there working towards justice and equity for all, I wish you the best International Women's Day week and month ever.
Perfect. Okay, I want to invite our next live speaker to the floor. And she is Chantal Hildebrand, Deputy Director at Alliance for Girls. Chantal holds a master's in public health and a master's in city planning from the University of California, Berkeley. She has a decade of experience in the non-for-profit sector. Welcome, Chantal.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. So today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, I want to acknowledge and celebrate all the powerful women, especially all the women of color, such as Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Williams, Sitkala Sa, Marsha P. Johnson, Angela Davis, Roxanne Gay, and so many more, whose bravery, passion, and dedication to gender equity historically and continuously uplifts the rights of all women. Without their determination and sacrifices, none of us would be here today at a conference about gender equality, let alone be part of discussions about how to create inclusive cities. Women and girls, as some of my other colleagues have said, are not a homogeneous group. With various intersectional identities that make up a human being, there is no one woman or girl that can speak from authority for all of us. And although there are overlapping issues that women and girls experience in cities, their needs are unique and require different approaches. This calls for conversations like today's to uphold a truly intersectional feminist lens, as coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. At Alliance for Girls, this means centering girls, especially girls of color, in our work. Alliance for Girls is the largest regional association of organizations and schools working collectively towards gender equity in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our vision is to create more equitable communities in which every girl thrives. We do this by amplifying girls' voices through girl-driven research, equipping intergenerational leaders with powerful tools and networks, and facilitating collective advocacy based on girls' policy recommendations. When we say girls, we are referring to gender-expansive youth, including cis girls, trans girls, non-binary youth, gender non-conforming youth, and genderqueer youth, and any girl-identified youth. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in early 2020, girls and gender-expansive youth were already struggling in their environments across the globe, both rural and urban. The COVID-19 pandemic eviscerated an already fragile ecosystem of support for girls. It did not create new inequities. It dramatically worsened existing ones. According to the 1,214 girls and gender-expansive youth in California that participated in Alliance for Girls' most recent research study, Uniting Isolated Voices, the experiences of girls and gender-expansive youth during COVID-19, 44% of girls experienced additional caregiving responsibilities due to shelter-in-place policies, which significantly impacted their ability to participate in school. 32% experienced financial instability, forcing them to take on work to subsidize their families. 19% struggled to access services. 18% lacked access to basic needs, such as period products or groceries. 16% reported not having access to internet connectivity, creating a systemic barrier for girls to fully engage with their education, healthcare, and support networks. And 12% did not have access to a safe place to live. All these issues led to 66% of respondents highlighting an increase in stress and anxiety. These statistics are even more drastic for the most vulnerable and vulnerable girls and gender-expansive youth, including systems impacted youth, those who have previously benefited from welfare or lived in subsidized housing, and girls with previous school suspension or expulsion, and overall girls of color. The severity of COVID can be attributed to how it challenged and upended the benchmark of safety. Not safety as defined by women, but safety as defined by girls themselves, especially those experiencing overlapping forms of oppression, such as systems impacted Black and brown girls and gender expensive youth. Safety as defined by girls is more than the absence of violence. It is the safety of our bodies, minds, and souls. So what then does safety truly look like in a city? It looks like every public department in every city investing in their data infrastructure to provide accessible and intersectional data on girls' needs as defined by girls themselves, that then can drive powerful policy solutions. The lack of data infrastructure and coordinated policy response rendered girls and gender expensive youth nearly invisible in this pandemic, a reality that is all too familiar for girls across the globe, particularly girls of color. It is time to change that story. Let's make gender equity a priority for every public department, with data and policy solutions embedded into issues that are at the center of our governments. It looks like coordinated approaches to gender-based violence prevention and responses that centers the survivor. Girls and gender expensive youth were more vulnerable to gender-based violence and sexual harassment during the pandemic. And from the data collected across the globe, GBV and sexual harassment spiked during this time. This is a crisis that is rooted in the environments and cultures that we are creating. Let's work together to actively shift gender norms, dismantle patriarchy, and uphold radical safety as girls and gender expensive youth themselves define it. It looks like cities deeply invested in programs, services, and policies that center gender and race equity. Girls and gender expensive youth were the unsung heroes of the pandemic, and yet they are constantly met with a fractured and underfunded support system that has reached a near breaking point. We cannot keep expecting girls and gender expensive youth to thrive within a broken system. It's time to truly invest in girls and gender expensive youth, not in the ways that we think not in the ways we think we should, but as dictated by girls and gender expensive youth themselves. These are the cities that we need now. Inclusive, safe, just cities designed and structured and built with not girls and gender expensive youth in mind, but as key designers of the policies, programs, and systems that make up their environment. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Chantal. And thank you, Safia, for your in-person words and opening up today's day 2 of our Urban Thinkers Campus. So we're going to move on to our first theme of today, and that theme is women in violence. And our first speaker for women in violence is the Honorable Lindsay Matheson. She was elected in 2019 for the House of Commons of Canada. She represents the New Democrats of London Fanshawe. We can't list all her work, but prior to her position, she worked for the NDP Parliament members for 11 years. She has been working in the social and economic justice domain for more than 20 years at the federal level with NDP members of Parliament. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm pushing all the buttons. You'd think after all these years on with COVID and Zoom, I'd have all the buttons figured out. I wanted to thank you and thank all the organizers of the Urban Economy Forum for allowing me to speak to you today, and happy International Women's Day. I would also like to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenni Lenape people. The local First Nation communities of this area include the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. And additionally, there's a large urban Indigenous population who make the City of London their home and my riding of London Fanshawe. I wanted to address issues that I heard specifically when I was sitting as a member of the Standing Committee for the Status of Women. We did a study on COVID's impact on women and of course what the federal government needs to do in that regard. The COVID-19 pandemic both exposed and exacerbated existing inequalities in Canada, particularly for women, those who identify as women, member of Indigenous and racialized communities, and individuals at the intersections of several identity factors. The risk of experiencing the devastating effect of gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, and human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation typically increases during economic downturns, and COVID was no exception to that. Many of us often heard during the pandemic that home was the safest place for you, that you needed to stay at home, but this was not true for too many women. And public health measures related to physical distancing have forced women to remain isolated with their abusers, placing them at risk of experiencing violence more often and with escalating severity. In general, shelters are underfunded and they need additional resources in order to meet demands for the services and supports they provide. The pandemic impacted shelters' ability to house as many people during or due to the need for that social distancing. So they had to find alternative and additional locations just to keep up with the need, but this required more money. And COVID hampered shelters' ability to fundraise. And without fundraising dollars, the shelters were further under-resourced. Gaps persist in access to and availability of appropriate services and supports for women fleeing violence and human trafficking, and this increases in rural and remote areas across the country. Over time, governments have moved to project-based short-term funding models, and this simply doesn't work. I would argue that the majority of government funding must move back to long-term, core, stable funding to allow the not-for-profit organizations in our community to use them as they need. When an emergency occurs, many groups don't have the ability to pivot and truly address the needs of their communities. They can't move emerging funds as required. The need for core funding for shelters is key. And in addition to the need for transitional housing and affordable housing units for women who are survivors of domestic violence and trafficking. Human trafficking, including trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, has also increased because women and girls are more isolated, and the focus on the internet has increased the risk of online exploitation. But we have yet to see a national action plan on gender-based violence. Governments have been talking about it for over 6 years, but there's no actionable steps that have been taken, and this is vital. We must also take into account Indigenous women and girls' needs in the provision of culturally appropriate services, both on and off reserve, and consider including access to shelters and transitional houses and to safe, affordable housing in this action plan as soon as possible. We must also immediately create a national action plan to implement all of the recommendations contained in the report, the final national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And of course, we cannot talk about improving women's physical safety if we don't talk about improving their financial safety and security as well. Women in Canada experience high rates of poverty. 2/3 of women have minimum wage jobs. Women are responsible for a disproportionate share of unpaid domestic labor and care work. And this burden too was of course increased by the pandemic. The workforces of many frontline and essential services where the risk of exposure to COVID-19 was particularly elevated are female dominated. Women, particularly racialized and migrant women, represent the majority of workforce in the healthcare sector, personal support care, janitorial services, retail services, as well as the not-for-profit and charitable service. Many women have had to leave that workforce or reduce their hours because they had to take care of children. And we must recognize the value of unpaid caregiving work and explore initiatives to recognize the compensation for individuals performing that unpaid work. And then of course, I know I have to wrap up and I know that there's limited time, but we have to talk about about childcare. I have a bill, a private member's bill that works with the federal government to enshrine that in legislation. But of course, in my province of Ontario, we still don't have an agreement signed with the federal government for that childcare. And this is a core part of what's required in order to get parents back into the workforce. And in addition, I'm just going to leave it off, but I know that we need pay equity. We need to help women who are unemployed, underemployed with increased employment insurance, paid sick leave, and a universal livable basic income. So I will end it there. I thank you so much, and I really appreciate you on this International Women's Day. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. A lot in there in a very short period of time. So well done. Okay, our next speaker up is Dulce Colleen, and they are the General Director of Equality and Attention to Gender Violence at the Secretariat for Women of Mexico City, the body responsible for dictating substantive equality policies between women and men, mainstreaming the gender perspective in the administration of the city, and of prevention, care, and eradication of discrimination and all kinds of violence against women. Welcome, Dulce.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here today in International Women's Day. We have a very busy agenda today in Mexico City, but I'm glad I got to be here today with you, sharing one of our main policies in Mexico City that we created in 2019 to prevent violence against women in public spaces. So I don't know if I may share a presentation. Can I do that? But first, I want to share with you like an introduction so you have the context on how this program was created. Well, as we all know, women and girls face more barriers than males, included unequal pay, sexual harassment and assault, poorly equipped and dangerous public spaces, and all of these challenges have only been exacerbated by COVID-19, which has forced an untold number of women out of the workforce. So on November 2019, Mexico City's mayor, Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, issued a gender violence alert on the city over alarming gender violence numbers. So she activated a series of measures to address violence against women. This gender violence alert is a protection mechanism for the human rights of women, and we believe that it's unique in the world. It's a national mechanism, and we activated in the city locally. And one of our major priorities to do this was to establish public policies to eradicate gender violence. And one of these policies that I want to highlight today is the Safe Paths program. And in Spanish, we call it Senderos Seguros, Camina Libre, Camina Segura. And it's the experience I want to share with you today. So we all know that the historic exclusion and invisibilization that women and girls have faced within urban development because of the roles and gender stereotypes have had nocive effects in the way we women and girls experience and occupy cities and the way we perceive security in public spaces. So we as a government, we know that any intervention that we may do in the public spaces is going to have different impacts in the lives on women and in men. So we started to approach the city interventions with gender lens. So we created this program because we believe that if a girl feels safe in the city, any person, anyone can feel safe in the city. So we created this program in 2019, in August 2019. And it's a program that we have some main objectives that is, we want safe, accessible, and caring public spaces for women and girls. We believe that cities must be for humans, not only for cars, for transit. And we want people in the streets, even in the night, because when the people is walking safely by night, it's an important indicator of the safe in the city. So with this program, we have 3 main components. One of them is, well, the urban and environment design. We increased the lining, prioritizing the paths where people walk, not only where the cars transit. We created maintenance for the green areas. We increased green areas in the streets, and also we did a major intervention in the way that people walk, and to create all accessibility for people with disabilities, for women with problems with mobility, for women that carries babies in the street. So we did that in the streets. And also we have a very big artistic program within this program to create murals and artistic interventions in the walls of these paths. The second component, it's technology. We increased the technology capacity for the safety. We have installed a lot of CCTVs, but also we have panic buttons in all of these paths. And also we created a digital panic button that can be activated in the CDMX app. That is the application where you can find all the services, the public services within one app. And the third component that we have in this program is community interventions. Because we want women to reclaim the streets, to occupy the streets. And so we created some activities to change the way women perceive the streets in their neighborhoods, to promote the meetings between women, to highlight the life in the neighborhoods. So we have a very strong program that involves culture interventions, sports interventions, among others. So with this program, we have intervened 508 kilometers. We have installed more than 64,000 CCTVs, and we have installed more than almost 11,000 panic buttons. And also we created the digital panic button I mentioned earlier. And all of this since 2019. And we already have very good results. Since 2019, we have seen the reduction of almost 29% of crimes against women, that is sexual harassment, but also robberies and all other crimes where women are the victims of these crimes. But also we have seen an increase of 36% of the perception of security among women, and we believe that that is the right way. we're very happy with these results, and we have plans to keep going with this program. We have a very large budget to increase more of these paths. So this is it. This is one of the programs that we are very happy to share with you tonight, to prevent and eradicate the violence against women and to create a city that we all want to live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delphi. It's really nice to hear some on the ground solutions taking place in the city of Mexico. I think that's excellent. Okay, our next speaker is Marisa Cacoros, and she is the founder and executive director of Aura Freedom International. Marisa started her journey in women's rights doing field work with different organizations around the world. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you, and happy Women's Day to everyone here. A day that is very special to me and so many, and I'm sure all of you as well. That's why you're here. It's wonderful to be here together in this space in solidarity as change makers and folks who want to see a better future. And I recognize all the women and trailblazers who have come before me and who have made this work possible for me. All of the women, some of you on this call, and women in my past and in the past of the history of the world who have made it possible for me to be here. Healthy urban cities and communities start with healthy women. In many cultures, including my own, women are the traditional custodians of their families, right, and their communities. So when you break a woman down with violence, you break down her family and all those around her. We don't talk about how gender-based violence shatters the very souls of women. Survivors know, and grassroots women's organizations know. Gender-based violence is fracturing families and fracturing communities and cities. It's disrupting education, creating intergenerational trauma and addiction. It is limiting economic empowerment and perpetuating poverty and food insecurity. Yes, gender-based violence is destroying our cities. And sadly, it's robbing us all of the infinite, untapped power and talent that all of these women and girls have. Municipal, provincial, and federal governments convene regularly to discuss the economy, migration, they discuss disease, conflict, climate change, but we, the grassroots women's sector, know that the eradication of gender-based violence and the empowerment of women and girls can bring increased wealth, health, and climate justice to our cities and communities. Indeed, the eradication of gender-based violence will bring us substantially closer to achieving the 2030 agenda, I'm sorry. If I could share my screen, I'm gonna just, awesome, it's already ready. I will put this link in the chat. Aura Freedom International is a grassroots women's organization. We work here in Toronto against gender-based violence and sex trafficking. We've been doing this for about 10 years. And our gender-based violence and the SDGs initiative really demonstrates through Canadian data how we will never achieve the Sustainable Development Goals while gender-based violence continues to occur. If we just look at no poverty and zero hunger, we can see that many Canadian women must choose between leaving an abusive relationship or facing poverty in Canada. And women who leave a partner to raise children on their own are 5 times more likely to be poor than if they had stayed. And women, we know, stay in violent homes to avoid homelessness and poverty. If we look at SDG 3 about good health and well-being, well, how can women and girls and gender diverse people enjoy good health if they are experiencing violence at pandemic rates? We know children who are exposed to family violence in Canada have double the rate of psychiatric disorders. If we look at quality education, well, sexual violence at school is affecting access to quality and safe education for Canadians. And 41% of all sexual assaults reported in Canada were reported by students. Gender equality, which is why we're all here, won't be achieved while we experience violence at this rate, at these rates. Every 2.5 days in Canada, a woman or girl is killed by violence. And Indigenous women and girls are murdered at 12 times the rate as non-Indigenous. We can go through them all. I would like to look at this one specifically. Women and gender diverse people with a disability are 2 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than those without a disability. So we will never achieve SDG 10 while GBV is occurring. I think we get the theme here, but we could go through all of the SDGs really. But why we're here today is to talk about sustainable cities and communities. And every night, thousands of women and children in Canada sleep in emergency shelters because, well, it's not safe at home, where we were told to stay during the pandemic. And in Toronto alone, women and children, and some of these are clients who I know and love dearly, are staying in violence against women shelters, domestic violence shelters, for 10 to 14 months longer while waiting for housing to become available. You know, when women and girls are healthy and safe, their families and communities thrive. And when countries consider the rights of women and girls a national priority, those countries flourish. And so I say the only way to move forward is to go back to the beginning and to see what happened and how we got here, to the root causes of gender-based violence: patriarchy, gender inequality, systemic racism, colonialism, homophobia, classism. If we can address these issues, we will create environments where gender-based violence is no longer tolerated and no longer happens, because we know GBV, gender-based violence, thrives in situations of inequity. And so today, on International Women's Day, I call on all of us to advance equity in everything we do. Every initiative we undertake to address gender-based violence has to center equity and center the voices of marginalized women. Gender-based violence in Canada, I say, and many of us say, is a national emergency, and it's time, in my opinion, to act accordingly. I want to share the link on the chat of that initiative, and you can explore a little bit more about the NGBV to Achieve SDGs initiative, and more about Aura Freedom International and the work that we do in Toronto. And thank you for inviting me here today to speak.
Thank you, Marisa. Excellent, excellent comments. I want to invite our next speaker, Soraya Ibrahim, who's the supervisor of Community Connection Center of Learning and Development, the TD Center of Learning. Soraya is the founder of Mother of Peace Regent Park, also part of Community Solidarity Against Racism in Construction, and a board member of the Harari Heritage Center. From her teenage years to now, she has volunteered, studied, and worked in her community of Regent Park. Welcome, Soraya.
Thank you. I don't know what to say after Marisa. I cannot, she summed it up everything, like I was noting everything what you said, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me on this platform. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are. Yes, like everything everybody said, it just touched my heart in so many capacities. We need to recognize the Black, Indigenous women experiencing different form of prejudice, and it's been mentioned so many times as well. The racism and other in Canada that we've been saying and we've been hearing also. I just want to irritate as well. In order to eliminate biases, barrier, we must take a stand with those most affected by and work from the ground up. And since yesterday, and I like the concept ground up of all of the speakers. That's where we bring about change. And we must take action for equity and collaboration with boycott individual and speak with them rather than for them. That's also very important. International Women's Day cannot be celebrated unless every woman is free and achieve their goal without racism, and law and politics and all form of political who are holding the power, and we need to emphasize and act on it as emergency. And I've been working for Region Park for the last more than 10 years now, and I've been seeing what the trauma does, and the gun violence leaves behind the woman effect more than the rest of gender, and that the trauma has ripple effect, and it doesn't leave the woman, especially the loss of the boys who are lose of the gun violence and what it does. And we have a healing circle that starts, and the amount of the grief and the trauma the moms they shared, and it's hard to explain and put in a words. Every time there is a gun violence and so it just we need to emphasize that the trauma that has ripple effect and leave behind the moms, the loss of the feeling, the loss of I cannot put in every life of that impacted by the moms or the gun violence. It's I cannot put the word on their grief, the trauma that they experience. And I just want to put this, and this is not just today a talk. We need to take action and move on and in order to bring about change. We hear it and we need to act. And everybody who has privilege, and we need to be allied and to bring about change. Enough is enough. And I think we have enough resource. We cannot let it the suffering continue. I don't want to take so much time, and we heard enough, and we need to do the action. And all of us, we have a power to change. I want to see all the men also to be in this platform and to be allied and to be a part of the change as well, not a part of a barrier to move forward or to bring about change. Thank you everyone for inviting me, and I have another Zoom to hop in, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Surya, for your heartfelt words. I'm sure many of you can feel it right down to your soul. Oh, trauma. Okay, we're moving on now to our next theme, which is women and urban inclusion. And our first speaker for that theme is Nuzat Jaffrey, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women and has been a longtime national board member and volunteer with the council. She also serves on the board of directors and as chair and member of several other nonprofit boards. Welcome, Nuzat.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you to the Urban Economy Forum for including us in your program. I've heard so many amazing things already today, and in fact, you know, they're not really that different from what I wanted to share, because everything that we've said so far has to do with inclusion of women and girls and gender diverse individuals in these conversations. They have to be engaged, they have to be asked, what kind of a city, what kind of a place do you want to live in? And unless they're asked and can contribute to the planning and design processes of our communities, then we will end up having communities that actually don't serve the vast array of individuals that live in them. And I'm going to just use a few examples of why concepts like accessibility, affordability, safety don't work equitably for everyone, because you know, oftentimes there are assumptions made about those concepts, and the input is not sought of the individuals who will be affected by them. And I can think of a number of examples like that. So for instance, I live right downtown. I live in the city of Toronto, right in the heart of downtown Toronto. And, you know, I have grandchildren and they come and they visit. So the closest park to me, you know, it's not far, but it's designed in a very limited way where the activities that they can engage in, especially if they're, you know, a little bit older, there's very limited activity for them. So I wondered who they asked when they were designing that particular park. It's small. And there's hardly any greenery in it. There's hardly any green space in it. So whoever thought about designing that space was really not thinking about grandmothers like me, and young children that visit their grandparents, because there are many grandparents here too. Not only that, there's very, in lighting is poor, and because these days, safety is paramount, but we have a lot of sidewalks that are breaking up, so people can trip and fall, and an older person like myself, where lighting is poor as well, the broken pavement can be lethal for us. And again, what kind of materials are being used, for construction of roads? Everything from ramps for wheelchairs, for strollers, for, there's no consideration, there's no consistency. And traffic lights and traffic signals, while there's some attention being paid to controlling traffic, there's very little that I can see happening that happens in communities that experience higher density. So and then there's a lot of challenges economically. So when I think about affordability, transit is still very, very challenging for many people. And childcare is extremely critical. You can't talk about inclusive communities without childcare, without accessible childcare, affordable childcare. And where we live in our province, we haven't signed the agreement with the federal government on childcare. So there are many, many women who cannot participate in the urban economy without childcare. And so when I'm thinking about designing and planning, I'm thinking both about the physical spaces for transit, for childcare, for schools, for parks, but also what the impacts are of lack of affordability and accessibility, because what happens is it ends up being exclusive. Women cannot participate, they cannot be included in the economy. And if they're not asked to be at the table and contribute to the process, the planning process, then they end up losing. They end up at the losing end of what we need for healthy, accessible, affordable, and safe communities. And I'm going to speak as the executive director now of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, and say that for us, there's an urgency for addressing safety of Canadian Muslim women who are visibly Muslim and are racialized and are Black, because they're not safe. They're attacked on the streets, they're attacked on transit systems. And unfortunately, people who are supposed to be helping with safety are not responsive. Our law enforcement officers are not helping. They are in fact hindering. There's lack of responsiveness on the part of those who are meant to keep us safe, but ignore our complaints. They don't take us seriously. So in the design and planning of our communities, we have to be aware that women in our communities are facing much more, a very ready threat in the streets or on public transit. So I'm just raising that alarm because that's the reality for many, many Muslim women in our country. That they've been attacked in major cities like Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Hamilton. So for me, if we want to be inclusive, if we want to have urban communities that are inclusive, we have to address the safety of our members of our communities in an urgent way. I think I've taken up too much time already, Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisa. Some excellent points there, especially bringing the need to urgently take action in terms of addressing the issues with Muslim and Black women in terms of being attacked in their communities. Okay, our next speaker is Adel Gamar, and they are the CEO and founder of Gamar Leadership Group. and is an advocate for the achievement of the UN SDGs Women's Advancement and Youth Empowerment. He is the board chair of Douglas College and co-founder of Gamar Foundation, a nonprofit that aims to inspire, empower, and connect young people to make positive differences in their communities. Welcome, Edo.
Thank you so much. And it's Adele Gamar, and I'm coming to you from the unceded and traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nations here on the West Coast, and the sun has finally decided to rise here this morning. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for the invitation. The panel has been beyond and has reached beyond my expectations in terms of how much learning I'm going to do. And to Soraya's point earlier, I think there's a lot of points here that all I can do is just sit back and say, thank you, and how could I be of help? As many of you here, I believe for us to truly have inclusive cities that are for all people, we must have women in city leadership roles. I also believe that we can't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and have equitable cities without young people helping us make that progress, specifically in planning, design, and implementing policies. It's a type of work that I have been fortunate to do at our foundation, at Gamar Foundation, where we bring in young leaders and we mentor them and ask them, look around your city. What progress do you want to see? And how could we help you? And so what I want to do in the time that I have with you this morning is share my platform with two inspirational young women who I believe are leading such phenomenal work. I know when I need to step back and allow others to step up. And so I'm going to show you a quick 1-minute video of one of our fellows and young leaders who've actually helped implement change in our city of Coquitlam, particularly around gender equity. And then I'd like to invite to the stage an incoming young leader, Sophie Rowe, who will share a couple of minutes of her thoughts around how we can make cities inclusive, particularly by having young people at the table of decision making. And so I'm going to just share with you Ellen Mee, and I'll let her speak to the project that she led at our city.
I never knew I could make an impact in people's lives. My name is Ellen Mee. I'm a Gamar Foundation Fellow from Coquitlam, BC. Gender equality is important to me, so when my high school teacher, Megan Leslie, brought to our attention some issues facing women, I knew I had to get involved. With two of my classmates, we petitioned to the mayor and city council to make menstrual products free and available in city washrooms. Because of our work, these products are now available across my city. Young girls and women will benefit from what we did. It gives me hope that others will try and make a change in something they believe in. I learned that you don't have to be an adult for people to listen. You just have to believe in the cause and those around you, and you can make a change in people's lives.
So Ellen is...
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot of fun.
That's the benefit of YouTube. You always get a commercial or two, either before or after. So Ellen is in university. When she initiated this project, she was still in high school. And so it's not only just talking about how we need to be bringing young people into the conversation. Here's a real example of one that actually helped implement policy in her city. The next person I'd like to share, and I think we have a couple of minutes left in the time that has been allotted to me, and therefore I want to yield to her, is Sophie Rowe, who will share with us. Sophie is a high school student, grade 12, going to university next year, and she's an aspiring architectural designer and engineer. And so I'd love for you all to meet her and hear her insight and perspective on how cities can be inclusive and gender equitable. Sophie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Gamar, for your mentorship. It is so thrilling to be here and to share the stage with you. Is there any way you might be able to share the, oh, you got it.
I am your TA this morning. There you go.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this is a typical hallway in a high school. Can you see anything wrong with it? At first glance, it looks fine, but if we take a moment to reflect on it, we begin to see that for a teenage girl, this space might be far from perfect. This hallway has no natural light. It's a long, dark corridor with crowded access to lockers, congested flow, spaces that are impersonal, difficult to supervise, and maybe even conducive to bullying. And there's no obvious spaces for human interaction or connection. The spaces in this school seem designed in a purely utilitarian way to access lockers and get to class without delay, minimize time and presence in those spaces between didactic education. This type of design could even seem like hostile architecture, design that purposefully restricts human behavior. As a high school senior, I think about this a lot, and as an aspiring architect, I've learned that good design can optimize learning environments by making them safer, more equitable, and more welcoming to everyone, and by promoting social interactions that build a sense of community and culture. I think that our most exciting opportunity in school and urban design is to reimagine spaces so that they benefit from the presence, ideas, and infinite creativity of girls, especially upon return to the classroom following a period of reflection on the nature of education during COVID-19. Next slide, please. I love this yes loitering idea from the South Bronx in New York that does just this. It reevaluates the safety and inclusivity of spaces. Next slide, please. Thank you. They find the no signs and tried to see how to turn them into yes signs that are inclusive. The design of our environments may account in part for girls' engagement and participation in STEM fields. When girls leave high school and enter the workforce, we see drastically skewed representation in STEM fields, with women accounting for less than 14% of working engineers in Canada. If our educational environments are have invisible barriers to girls' education that can be addressed with thoughtful architecture, I propose that it's time that we redesign them. So I have a couple of examples of places that have been doing this very powerfully. This is in Dublin, Ireland, a place for girls to come and hang out and be outside. Next slide, please. This is on the D Street lawn in Boston, spaces that light up and create inclusive and space hangouts for girls not to feel in danger of walking home in the dark. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, creating these outdoor spaces that are fun, promote physical activity, and allow for inclusion and safety. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I guess these are just all great examples of ways that we can start to be designing these at a low cost and with creativity and ingenuity in mind. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So there are invisible and visible barriers that exclude girls from important conversations. We must design thoughtfully and with sensitivity because their potential to address these challenges will change the world. I think that matters, and I think that it's important that we allow young women to be part of these conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. And Sophie and I have to go to school. She's got to go to class. I've got to take my daughter to school. So thank you so much for sharing the platform. And Sophie, thanks for the inspiration.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sophie and Adele. And actually, Adele, you reminded me of something that I hadn't yet said today, that if I mispronounce your name, please feel no ways about correcting me as soon as you come on. It's the right thing to do, and I will not be upset by you doing so. So please do that. Wonderful. That was a great presentation. I want to introduce our next speaker under this theme, Ellen's Woodsworth. And Ellen is the founder of Women Transforming Cities International Society and former Vancouver City Councillor. She is an internationally recognized speaker and consultant calling for cities to put an intersectional gendered lens on policies, programs, budgets, and governance to create women-friendly cities that work for everyone. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. There's so many exciting things happening today around the world, and my heart goes out to the women and the resistance movements in the Ukraine, led by women, LGBTQ community, racialized community, and other vulnerable populations. Women Transforming Cities International Society is based on the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. It is also one of the sites of the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. We are an intersectional feminist organization that's inclusive of all self-identified women and girls. Women and girls work for cities, but cities do not work for women and girls. Cities are a site of resistance for women from the country, reserves, war zones, and other parts of the world who need to find a home, and they're looking for organizations to join. This is our story. As a Vancouver City Councillor, I launched the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Cities Tailored to Women national project at the Barcelona World Urban Forum. While there, I had a dream of designing a women-friendly cities and went home, and with the only other women city councillor, we created a diverse women's task force, which created the first Canadian gender equality strategy, calling for a women's advisory committee to council and for the city to act on Indigenous women's issues. When the Women's Advisory Committee was established, I proposed that we design an ideal city for women and girls. Women Transforming Cities was launched in the council chambers, and then we began holding endless local neighborhood cafes in different languages to find out what grassroots women's key issues were. We held a national conference to discuss actions with key players who could make it happen: elected, the women's movement, urbanists, academics, students, and unions. We created a hot pink paper municipal election campaign based on the grassroots calls for action for the 2014, 2018, and are now preparing for the 2022 municipal elections. We call on all candidates to take action with an intersectional gendered lens based on Black leader Kimberly Crenshaw's definition, using disaggregated data on city policies, programs, budgets, funding, staffing, and governance, and focused on housing, transit, childcare, paid work, the environment, youth engagement, Indigenous women and girls, violence, and electoral reform. Step by step, we raise and amplify women's voices and women's representation. We worked with women's groups on wording for the new urban agenda, submitted our cafe findings to the Urban Thinkers campuses, and the CREA joint project, Advancing Equity and Inclusion, a how-to guide for municipalities as a wise practice, and created the Queer Declaration for the UN Habitat Conference. We launched the Women Friendly Cities Challenge, our international online library of wise practices based on the SDGs, the New Urban Agenda, and CEDA at WOOF in Kuala Lumpur, all the while mentoring young women. After the 2018 election, the city did a new City for All Women gender equity strategy, using an intersectional lens on 4 key issues: safety, housing, childcare, leadership, and representation. We were able to get Vancouver to unanimously support putting a gendered intersectional lens, measurable and supported for 6 years on all departments. Last year, we created a Watch Council committee to follow all council meetings and speak out on issues of concern like climate change, electoral reform, and police violence. We called for cities to develop a COVID-19 intersectional feminist economic strategy and joined women's groups on provincial and federal recovery calls to action, as the impact caused massive job losses, increased racism, domestic, religious, and 2S LGBTQI violence, setting us back years. Today, we're showing women in other cities how to create hot pink paper campaigns. We're partnered with organizations around the world. We're talking to municipalities about how they can act on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 2S Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girl recommendations. We're educating ourselves to take systemic action against Black, Asian, and people of color racism and colonialism. Today, the City of Vancouver has a Chief Equity Officer reporting directly to the City Manager. There are women's, 2S LGBTQI, racialized, disabled seniors, and other advisory committees reporting to Council using intersectional gender language. The City is using Gender-Based Analysis Plus, analyzing staff salaries and leadership. 8 of the 10 councillors are women, but they're white. They're all white. The mayor has always been a white man, but all councillors are calling themselves feminist. In the election, all the mayoral candidates are men. An active intersectional gendered NGO is always necessary. Older women want to share their wisdom, younger women want to be activists. So we share our training and our teachings and our learning and the tools, and we work together. We need a balance between the city, grassroots women, and women transforming cities working together to create the city we need now. Let's go forward together to create women's friendly cities. An acknowledgement of what's happening in the Ukraine. Let's turn defense budgets into peace budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, and what an amazing amount of experience that you have. And from our last session a couple months ago, it stuck with me, wise practices versus best practices. So that was a new one. Thank you so much for that. I have been requested to ask everyone if you could turn on your cameras, please, so we can get a collective group photo of everyone. I love seeing everyone's faces appear. It's so nice. So Ilda, if you're taking the photo, just let us know when they can escape behind and turn off their cameras again.
I will go ahead and take the picture. Smile, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
All good? Good, Roseanne?
Yeah. It's all good.
Yes, okay. You can hide again if you wish. I know sometimes when I attend these events, I don't want to be on camera, so I kind of hide behind too, so it's okay. And don't worry when they take the photos, our photos are so small that, you know, any details, we won't be showing much. Okay, let's move into our next theme, which is women and environment. And one of our speakers, I hope it's okay with our other speakers. We just need to bump up one of our speakers. Just they've got some personal appointments. That's the best way to put it, that they're carrying to today. So they're on the road and they're going to do their talk briefly on their phone. So I'm going to welcome Dr. Robin King, who is the Director for Knowledge Capture and Collaboration at the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities at the World Resources Institute. Dr. Robin King is an adjunct professor at the School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University. And Dr. King has worked as a principal researcher at the Center for Study of Science, Technology, and Policy in Bangalore, India. And previously, she held the posts at the G7 group at the US Department of State and the Mellon Bank. Welcome, Dr. King.
Great, thank you. Again, thank you for your flexibility. And as you can see, I'm sitting in a car. My father just finished his appointment. I'm here speaking. I thought that I tried to do it outside, but the lighting didn't work and I kept getting cut off. And I apologize if I get cut off in the meantime. I'm going to draw today on some work that we've done at the World Resources Institute on a report called Cities for All. That's a World Resources report. There's a series of 16 papers that you can find for free on the website. Also some work that we've done with the C40 and cities, C40 member cities around the world on inclusive climate action planning, as well as some work on just transition that's happening throughout WRI. I'd like to make three main points. Hopefully you can see me still and hear me. The first is about representation and inclusion. And I think the last two, the last two presentations actually pointed this out, and the importance of women of all ages being included in policy discussions, in negotiations, in research, and actual implementation as participants, as well as a topic. And not just participating, but being taken seriously. I think we all know about committees that have sort of one woman or one young person that is on the committee, but it's never really taken seriously and listened to. So I think that the idea of representation and inclusion sort of is one key point. Another key point is the importance of data disaggregation. right? When we're looking at numbers, we need to be able to disaggregate and to collect that data in ways to measure differential vulnerabilities in impacts of risks and policy impacts of environmental changes and many other kinds of policies. So there are many ways to disaggregate, right? There can be socioeconomic groups. We can look at gender, ethnic groups, language, First Nations, Indigenous groups, age, locations, right? Specific neighborhoods, and different kinds of topographies, the differently abled, and legal status of many kinds of communities and kinds of housing. And it's important to note that while we tend to get very aggregated data maybe once a year, that there can be different kinds of risks at different times of year, right? Depending on snow, rain, heat, cold, and that within cities themselves, there can be different kinds of risks in different locations. Within the same city, you can have places that are sort of suffering from too much heat, as well as places that sort of are well covered and where sometimes in terms of access to services with buses and things, if there's a lot of rain or a lot of snow, regular public transport won't work. And so thinking about this data, not just sort of as an aggregate, but disaggregated over time and space is also important. The third point I'd like to mention is just the importance of informality. And this is especially sort of in the global south and in Mexico, but it exists everywhere, and we need to acknowledge that it exists. And this includes the economy of care, right? That's often non-compensated or very, very poorly compensated, and it doesn't show up in a lot of the national statistics. One of the ways in the environmental space that we see this often is women working sort of in a volunteer basis or informally in parks, and to help keep some of those playgrounds that a few speakers ago mentioned being so important to our communities. So those are very general things and are a little bit depressing. But I'd like to share very quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is a few examples of things that can give us hope and that we can replicate. And these are examples from North America. One is in Washington, D.C., where I usually live when I'm not here in Niagara Falls with my parents, is that the city is working with doctors and health insurers, as well as retail stores and local food producers in a pilot program to promote the use of healthy food given as a prescription. So it's no longer sort of something, it's something that the doctor says that you need to do, and that the systems then need to adapt to the doctors actually saying healthy food is important. This is especially important in food deserts that we have in a lot of the areas where we have many minorities. Another is in terms of Mexico presents a lot of statistics now that actually allow us to look at the economy of care. That is some of this disaggregation that we need to be able to see what the differences are between men and women, how we can focus on what's needed, and those gender differentiated indicators also sort of are done sort of throughout many of the services that they're tracking. So we know in transportation, for example, what kinds of challenges women face versus men sort of in transportation. And I just like to end by saying, when we're thinking about the environment, food, as I said with the DC example, is an important area. In the Toronto food strategy, actually where information is shared with everyone is an important piece of that. That when we think about data, yes, there's data that we collect, but there's also data that we need to share. And that data can be of all different sorts. So thank you very much for allowing me to share these ideas. There are many more ideas and examples that can be found in our research that's available on the WRI website. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King, and for also showing us how women will get it done no matter what and show up. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kanisha Acharya Patel, who is the Executive Director of Women's Healthy Environment Network, WEN for short in Canada. Kanish is on her last term of law school at the School of Law at Dalhousie University, where she is specializing in environmental law and Indigenous law. She's also the executive director at the Women's Healthy Network, Healthy Environment Network in Toronto. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. Okay, can everybody see my presentation on the screen? Okay, great. So thanks for that introduction. You said my name correctly, which is great. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Kanisha. I'm joining from Halifax, the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm from Waterloo. My background is in environmental science, and I am currently specializing in environmental law. I'm super grateful to have the opportunity to be working part-time as executive director of WEN, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Toronto that aims to raise awareness of the links between women's health and their environment and promote public action for toxic-free communities. So when I talk about the link between health and environment, I'm basically speaking about how the environment is a key determinant of health. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and the products we use are all avenues for exposure to toxic substances, which can have very harmful health effects. The link between women and their environment speaks to the fact that women are more vulnerable to toxic substances than men because of sex and gender specific differences. Currently, WEN is in the process of engaging in law reform to improve the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA, which is a key piece of federal legislation aimed at protecting environmental and human health by controlling toxic substances. CEPA operates on the oversimplified assumption that environmental health risks, specifically toxic substance exposures, are uniformly distributed across the general population, and therefore does not protect subpopulations who are at greater risk than the general population, such as women. So what leads to an individual or subpopulation being at a greater risk than the general population is their identity factors, such as sex, gender, race, culture, and income. The current CEPA, in assessing the risks of a toxic substance, does not adequately consider how an individual or subpopulation's identity factors can intersect and increase one's exposure to toxic substances or one's susceptibility to the negative health effects from such exposures. So in the context of women, sex and gender are the primary identity factors that make women more vulnerable to toxic substances. Gender, for example, speaks to exposure. Cosmetics and personal care products, for example, many of which contain hundreds of harmful chemicals, are disproportionately marketed towards and used by women. So women are therefore exposed to these types of toxic substances way more than the general population. Sex speaks to susceptibility. Many toxic chemicals have sex-specific effects, meaning that they impact the female body differently than the male body. Many toxic substances become toxic at a lower concentration in the female body than in the male body. And many substances have female-specific health effects, such as reduced fertility or hormone disruption, but CEPA does not account for these differences. Culture is another identity factor that can impact exposure. Indigenous communities, for example, are disproportionately exposed to toxic substances due to their traditional lifestyles, which include hunting, fishing, and ceremonial activities. Subsistence diets can increase exposure, for example, by eating fish that could be contaminated with mercury, and many Indigenous communities on reserve still do not have access to clean drinking water, which is another route of exposure to toxic substances. WEN emphasizes taking an intersectional approach to toxic substance management because identity factors can intersect and compound vulnerability to toxic substance exposures. So for example, the intersection of sex, gender, and culture results in Indigenous women specifically being disproportionately vulnerable. CEPA is currently being amended for the first time since 1999, and many environmental organizations, including WEN, are advocating for a stronger and more protective CEPA. WEN's primary focus is enhancing the protection of vulnerable populations, including women, Indigenous and racialized communities, and other marginalized groups from the adverse health effects of toxic substance exposures. In advocating for this issue at the legislative level, WEN is challenging various institutional biases, including gender bias in healthcare, law and policy development, and in research. The healthcare industry continues to trivialize the health impacts of toxic chemicals on women, and not enough women's organizations are being consulted in the development of laws and policies impacting women. This results in a largely male group making decisions about women's health. Research about the health impacts of toxic substances is largely focused on the white male body, despite the physiological differences between male and female bodies. The data used to make decisions about the permissibility of a toxic substance to enter the environment, such as estimated exposure levels, is based on aggregate data representative of the general population. And this doesn't allow for identification and protection of specific groups who are at higher risk than the general population due to their identity factors. All of these institutional biases directly contribute to the exclusion of women and other vulnerable populations from legislative protections surrounding toxic substance exposures. Accordingly, WEN is calling on the federal government to require consideration of the health of women and other vulnerable populations when assessing and managing the risks of a toxic substance. WEN has submitted recommendations to the Senate pertaining to this issue with hopes that the amendments will be strengthened before they become law. So on a personal note, I appreciate being asked to speak at this conference, and I'm super grateful to WEN for providing a platform for me to uplift my research and advocate for this type of change. And like so many speakers have mentioned, representation is key, and it's so important that we continue creating space for more women, and especially more BIPOC women, to be included in conversations around policy and legislative change. So yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for listening. And if you have any questions or want to know more about WEN's law reform work, please feel free to email me or you can add me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation and certainly brought insight into an area that maybe a lot of people haven't been thinking at from a gender perspective in terms of chemicals in our environment and how they impact us. Brilliant. Okay, our next speaker is Maya Tate, and Maya has been the mayor of Souk, the district of Souk, BC since 2014. And while serving in office, Mayor Tate has served the interests of the Souk residents on various panels throughout the region and the province. She served Girl Guides of Canada and Victoria Women's Sexual Assault Center before becoming the mayor. Welcome, Maya.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this amazing exchange. I'm joining you virtually today from the territories of the Sauk and Sianu nations. I'm very grateful for their stewardship of the lands and waters that have existed since time immemorial and continue to this day, and thank them for their strong leadership. Okay, so it's early here and I was in a late council meeting last night, but the topic of our discussion at council is so relevant because it was all about our official community plan. And what that document does is it helps us guide our land use patterns for the next 10 years. Souk is located on southern Vancouver Island, so we're in one of Canada's most southern western corners. We say that you can find us where the rainforest meets the sea. We're blessed here with a very gentle climate, moderate temperatures, and a small but growing community that is deemed to be, as always, we work to be safe and inclusive, and I think is one that has always done its best to welcome everyone. And I say that because while this area has been settled for over 150 years, we are part of the Douglas Treaty, and such was done in the spirit of trust and friendship. And I often feel that that sentiment continues to prevail to this day, even though we're waiting for a more formalized treaty process to be ratified with the Sauk and Sianu nations. Our community has only been incorporated since 1999, and I've been elected since 2008. And so I feel that the interesting thing about me is that my life experiences have been an influencer on local policy decisions. When I first got elected in 2008 as a councillor, my husband and I were recently married, but we were dual income with no children. And for many times enjoyed the ability to have more of a disposable income, to travel as we pleased and to do as we liked without a lot of responsibilities, perhaps other than to maintain our house. Since that time though, I've been blessed with a young child who's now 6. And I've also been a caregiver to aging parents. And one can really appreciate the impact of the environment as well as infrastructure when you're looking to push someone in a wheelchair while also carrying a child in a carrier. And so with our other conversations around urban design, even sometimes I couldn't get them out of the car because the parking spaces were not wide enough to get out and the accessible spots were not located near a ramp. So it's provided me an opportunity on how folks move safely throughout the community. If I didn't feel safe, certainly other residents wouldn't as well. And where are the green spaces and how do we keep our children safe while accessing these, but also enabling our grandparents to be able to take their kids safely to these areas. In terms of the environment, there's a recognition by our council that we're all connected and the decisions we make have an impact on those we share the territory with, whether that's two-legged, but also the four-legged, finned and feathered. We notice with the impact of climate change that there is a movement of invasive species that are rapidly growing throughout our community. Scotch broom, for example, which has plagued this area since it was colonized, continues to be an igniter of wildfire. And because we are on the boundary of a natural environment, the wildfire threat is real, and it's one that we feel all the time. In fact, it's to the point where summertime just fills me with anxiety because what's going to happen this year? And the broom can just ignite the flames and spread it both overland as well as underground. In our rivers, we have an ever-growing presence of knotweed, which is choking up the streams and the tributaries that our salmon need to navigate when they head upstream to spawn. We also have green crab growing throughout our harbor, which is threatening eelgrass, as well as the broodstock of salmon. And all of this is important because while the federal government focuses much on orca populations, we're focusing what feeds them and keeps them healthy, and also what feeds our families. Souk is a growing community. Since we've incorporated, our population has more than doubled. And I want to brag a bit about local governments for a bit, because throughout the pandemic, we're the ones where people live. So as folks were working from home and needing broadband, where do we have Wi-Fi and where do we don't? Where does cell coverage start and exist? All of this came very fast and furious towards local government. Vaccine clinics could not operate without local government finding the space and making them happen. As well as setting the necessary service levels that go around and keeping people safe, whether that's police, fire, or bylaw. And there's also the ever-growing need of, to address the needs of homelessness. Where will the shelters be located? How will emergency services be put in place to provide those unsheltered populations? It was local government that met that challenge head on. And for that, I'm very proud of my community and the work that we do. We're a growing community, and I think there's been a flight from urban to rural. There was perception that we're safer in small communities. Perhaps we are. But all of this impacts our infrastructure, which has not kept up with the pace of growth. And for this is where local government is responsible. Our desire in the past to keep taxes low and affordable has led to a deficit, and now we're falling behind in keeping up with the growth. And to make traffic movements or to create areas where active transportation could be used. Housing prices are soaring. We're a desirable place, and while Souk remains one of the more affordable parts of the region, there's no supply. Housing, as soon as it goes up for sale, it's sold, often with an offer well over asking. And while that's wonderful for the seller, a lot of folks are now stuck in homes that may not serve their needs into the future, but there's nowhere to go. If you sell your house, you may do very well, but you're unable to remain in the community because we don't have the necessary stock to meet everyone's needs. At the same time, the threats of climate impacts, as well as concerns of protecting the natural environment, are all very valid. But even when we went to put in a affordable housing projects, there's a reaction of, no, we don't want this here. We don't want more people here. So where are people going to go? When we hear about places like Lytton and others that are dealing with vast disasters, are we really going to say, no, you're not welcome here? After which point, which wagon will be the last one to roll in before we pull up the drawbridge and say we don't want any more? And to see just the impact that refugees are having, not only in the Ukraine, but certainly Syria, Afghanistan, and others. Are we really going to tell people that, no, you can't be here because we want to protect everything? So that's the balance that we're struggling with. It'll be our challenge going forward. And I'm out of time. I could talk to you for hours about this, but I thank you so much for allowing me to share just a few moments with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. We are now going to move to, I believe it's a voice recording of a presenter. The presenter's name is Mohua Mukherjee, who is the Senior Research Fellow of Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. They are an energy and climate finance expert, and she was a senior development professional and team leader for over 25 years at the World Bank. So if we could play that clip, that would be wonderful.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
I'm not sure if it's playing, Ozan. I don't have any sound here.
Hi, everyone. I'll be talking to you about women in the urban environment and climate finance. I'll conclude with some important and urgent actions so that the gender lens actually delivers meaningful future benefits. Here's a 30-second version to give you an overview. Things are grim today for low-income women in developing country cities, but a once-in-a-century change is on the horizon from anticipated investments in the green transition and climate resilience. So what can we do now to make sure women are playing on the team instead of sitting on the sidelines again once the climate money arrives? How can we create opportunities so that women benefit in multiple ways from the green urban makeover? That will be my 3-minute talk. So first, the grim stuff. How does a low-income urban woman live today in a typical third world city? She's probably migrated from a rural area and lives in an informal settlement on the edge of town. Most of these conditions apply to her. No piped water, no sanitation, no paved roads, no shade, no flood protection, no reliable electricity, no street lights, no protection from domestic violence, no shelter from extreme heat, no health clinic nearby, no legal land title. If she's a maid or a low-wage factory worker, she probably has a long and difficult bus commute to her job. Now, her city's budget hardly has enough money to meet municipal payroll, let alone fix anything. Even in her rich employer's house, there could be several hours of water shortage or water dry taps due to leaky pipes. But now, thanks to the green transition, change is coming. Climate finance should help convert the diesel public transport fleet to electric. Broken traffic lights and street lights will be replaced with solar versions. Storm drains will be rebuilt with climate adaptation funds to reduce flood frequency, and so on. Will men once again decide every feature and location of this new infrastructure? No, not necessarily. Not if we start a decade-long effort immediately, supporting local NGOs to form women's neighborhood groups, collecting inputs on changes that women need to see. Kudumbashree in Kerala, India, is a global best practice example of how a grassroots women's group handles two-way information flow with top planners and decision makers. Climate financiers will surely seek women's inputs, but if the local hard work has not been done in advance, authenticity will be lacking. Box-ticking answers from elite women who don't use and don't know public services may end up being used for crucial planning decisions. So women need support to get comfortable talking in groups about changes. NGOs must get really good at collecting credible, gendered urban planning data. But women have to have more than their voice. Millions of dollars of public procurement contracts are coming for climate proofing and greening the city. Let's make sure some of these contracts go to women-owned businesses. They need support and training to read and respond to public procurement notices. As for the large corporations dreaming of winning mega contracts under urban climate resilience, let's make sure that only the women-friendly ones can bid. Let them invest in training and promoting their female staff today and retaining them with family-friendly policies. Those are the ones we want to give the contracts to. So we need to start a new global buzz. Women-owned businesses and women-friendly corporations must be at the center of delivering our urban transformation. This could create some meaningful inclusiveness that climate finance providers talk about, but it takes hard work and years of upfront preparation. I wish you success in your efforts. We can't afford to miss this opportunity. Thank you for your attention. Hi, everyone.
Folks in your room with you. But anyway, great points in relation to environment and women. I think what we're going to do is just kind of keep plowing ahead with the agenda. We're a little ahead of time now, but that's okay. We'll keep moving forward. So we'll move into our closing sessions, and our first speaker of a closing session is Bita Adei. And Bita is the Special Assistant to the Undersecretary of Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment, and Senior Advisor on Women's Economic Issues to the Assistant Secretary of Economic and Business Affairs for the U.S. Department of State. Welcome, Bita.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And it's been really delightful to hear the conversations that folks at this event have been having. So it's really an honor to be here and to hear from all of you all who we consider honestly the subject matter experts on this issue and the implementers in the field. So this type of engagement is really wonderful. So I'm excited to be joining you today to share some of the work that the United States is engaging on around advancing gender equity and equality and the important role we see gender playing in infrastructure. So this conversation and this event is quite timely. A year ago today, President Biden signed an executive order establishing the White House Gender Policy Council. And that was really a game changer for U.S. foreign policy as it relates to gender practices. The Biden and Harris administration see advancing gender equality and equity not only a matter of human rights, justice, and fairness, but also a strategic priority that promotes, among other things, economic growth, which we've touched on quite a bit. And the administration is empowering women leaders and innovators and entrepreneurs to fully participate at all levels of the economy. And we see that there's a critical need to advance women's economic empowerment in climate adjacent sectors such as agriculture, STEM, and infrastructure, which we've touched on today. And for us, this means increasing access to agricultural resources, land, financing, training, and tools for women farmers who represent 43% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries. In the climate context, we also see this means promoting opportunities for women and girls to lead in the green and blue economies, whether as end users or entrepreneurs. All of these things are things that I've been hearing echoed through the discussions, at least from this last breakout session. And so I think one of the biggest things is that this is such a huge scope of issues, whether we're ranging from hard infrastructure to soft infrastructure to social impact initiatives. So I want to share a little bit of what the USG is doing, how we're looking at it, and hopefully demonstrate how we're hoping to touch on a number of these issues. So as we think of gender and gender within the economy and infrastructure, we see gender in every aspect of the economy. And so that includes within our economic policies. And from what we've all experienced in the past 18 months with COVID-19 pandemic, supply chains and infrastructure, particularly around digital and health infrastructure, are critical to economic recovery as we see it. And we recognize that gender infrastructure and gender responsive projects are important to building resilience in facing future global climate crises, or global crises in general, not just climate. So the U.S. Department of State recognizes an opportunity here to promote sustainable infrastructure projects and solutions by harnessing the potential of women, girls, and gender diverse persons through policy, programming, and public outreach, and as key change agents and leaders in their communities. We know that women have been disproportionately impacted by disproportionately impacted by COVID, which has been one of the biggest challenges of our time. And so at the core of the solution and response, we see women being a key player. And that turns me to an initiative I want to speak about called Build Back Better World, or B3W. The United States government's vision for the G7 Build Back Better World, or B3W initiative, is to advance infrastructure development across low and middle income countries in a thoughtful way, which would include through a gendered lens. A little bit about the initiative. Low and middle income countries collectively need about over $40 trillion worth of investments to significantly narrow the infrastructure gap by 2035, is our understanding. And President Biden has pledged to double the U.S. government's commitment to over $11 billion per year to help meet this $100 billion commitment. B3W seeks to address three core areas. The failures of our global supply chain and public health infrastructure are threats to our physical and economic security, the first. Second, choices about how infrastructure is built in the developing world can determine whether we meet the moment on climate change and other sustainable development goals. And third, direct engagement with partners now can foster new economic and export opportunities for U.S. businesses and just Western businesses in general. So the U.S. government plans to meet B3W's investment goals through public commitments through our U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, USAID, the Millennial Challenge Corporation, and various numbers of our agencies to leverage private capital and actively harmonize with our G7 counterparts. While B3W is heavily focused on supply chains and investment that are consistent with achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, it also prioritizes future health crisis mitigation through shoring up vaccine development and manufacturing capacity. Now, we've been talking quite a bit today about the role of women in infrastructure and urban planning. And I think when we talk about climate change and we talk about health, hopefully everyone on this call is aware that women play a very critical role in those sectors. So now allow me to speak to how this specifically relates to gender from the US government's perspective. Gender is one of the 4 focus points of the B3W initiative, and we envision it being cross-cutting to ensure each project accounts for gender equity. There is an opportunity to advance gender equality and women's economic empowerment through projects supporting care economy, maternal health, healthcare workers, supporting infrastructure, such as public sanitation and sanitation systems, public transportation systems, which colleagues Elaine and Grace noted to just a few minutes ago, in order for us to ensure women are empowered to pursue economic opportunity. It may be the case that when people think about infrastructure projects, gender equality and gender opportunities are not the first thing that comes to mind. And I think this group can strongly speak to how that is not, that could be the first thing that comes to mind. And I think we need to make our voices louder, to be honest, on that front. Because now is the time that we can make change. And I can speak on behalf of the US government, saying that the US government understands that gender can and should be an integral part of infrastructure projects. This means including perhaps viewing this in 2 different lights, hard and soft infrastructure. And this is where we hope that the B3W initiative, through its gender focus lens, can help address both. With hard infrastructure, we've just heard quite a bit about that. It could be with regards to urban planning and housing, public transportation systems. But with regards to soft infrastructure, we need to first understand the role women play in their communities, and in that, what tools they need to use any type of infrastructure investment or resources that are available, and to be able to be empowered by what is available to them. So how can we do this, and how do we see us doing this? We see this being achieved by thinking of women in infrastructure design, supporting women-owned, led, and managed companies, applying a gender analysis to proposed infrastructure projects, supporting women's employment, leadership, and governance, and including women in urban planning to ensure a balanced approach. In layman's terms, we need to have women at the table in all this work. Before I wrap up, I just want to say, in addition to the B3W initiative, there's just several other State Department programs and initiatives aimed at supporting gender equality and women's leadership in key sectors that support overall USG policy priorities of inclusive infrastructure and economic development. This includes POWER, also known as Providing Opportunities for Women's Economic Rise, which is the department initiative looking to connect women entrepreneurs and business leaders in the US with counterparts abroad. We are strong supporters of the Women's Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, WEFI, along with our Canadian counterparts. And this is housed at the World Bank that looks to address the credit gap facing women-led small and medium-sized enterprises across the developing world. And we also have the Innovation Station Initiative and Female Leaders in Energy program that looks to empower women as leaders in blue and green economies and broader climate innovation. As we look to more inclusive urban and economic development at large, we must continue to provide women and girls, including those from marginalized communities, the tools necessary to succeed, build community resilience, and deploy innovative solutions. Solutions to climate impacts and health crises developed by women and girls for their local communities will not only contribute to accomplishing our shared goals, but they may prove to be game-changing for other communities around the world facing similar challenges. I can speak to that a little bit as my own previous life, in my previous lifetime as an engineer and working on water sanitation systems. So with that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to seeing the outcomes of today's conversations and to ensure infrastructure development can be more gender equitable and inclusive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rita. It was nice to hear perspectives from like the US government side of things as well. That was very interesting. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker up is Christine Auclair. Would you believe I've just gone and shuffled my papers? Just one sec. And Christine is the lead and advocacy and campaigns for the world, lead of advocacy and campaigns for the World Urban Campaign with UN Habitat. And she has more than 25 years of experience in urban issues at the national and international level. It's wonderful to see you here, Christine. Welcome. And we have you on mute still.
Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen right now. Sorry for that. Let me put the full presentation. Is it on? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eleanor. And I'm very, very honored to be part of this closing. I'd like to congratulate UEF, CAP, CHMC, and all those who have contributed to this fantastic UTC. Among all the UTCs held and to come in 2022, I must say this one is close to my heart because first of all, I'm convinced that the battle for the city we need is anchored in a spirit of gender equality. And secondly, without the co-contribution of women in society, we won't have the city we need. I'm convinced about that. So during this UTC, let me go to the next slide. Yeah, during this UTC, we have explored how women can forge the city we need to help accelerate the SDGs to 2030. We know at the moment that unfortunately we are off track, and I'm convinced that it's only with women and in all action areas defined in the city we need now that we will be able to make progress. There is no single area where women don't contribute and where they don't champion solutions to accelerate the new urban agenda implementation. So I'd like to remind here that the city we need is a manifesto. It is a living document of the World Urban Campaign, or global coalition of 200 organizations that leads the UTC process. And this is one of the many UTCs this year. And that is a global conversation on the implementation of the new urban agenda. What to explore solutions and game changers to accelerate precisely the implementation of the SDG to 2030. So during this UTC, during this UTC, many solutions have been presented by you to better achieve gender equality and women empowerment in all SDGs and in the 10 action areas of the city we need, from health to safety, planning and services, and all those areas to build better cities and communities. All actions and goals are connected and interdependent. The city we need promotes inclusion, gender equality, and women's empowerment, and that is critical to the achievement of the SDGs. So it's one of the 10 action areas of the city we need. So as you know, I'd like to remind you, 2022 is a key year for us to take a step back on urban issues and to reflect on the progress made in terms of urban development. What have we done in cities since we realized that they had a key to play in reaching global targets in many respects? In 1976, it was the first realization that cities could, and that was in Vancouver and in Canada, where in the countries we are talking about, in the region we are talking about today, it was the first realization that cities could become a liability to development. It was the first UN conference on housing and urban development, Habitat 1. 20 years later in Istanbul, at the Habitat 2 conference, we started to reflect on the positive role of cities. And in Habitat 3, 2016, government defined what we call the new urban agenda and the Quito Declaration to take action. And this year, 2022, 6 years later, government will have to review their progress in the implementation of the new urban agenda. There will be a high-level meeting at the UN, a legislative meeting on the 28th of April, as mandated by the UN General Assembly, to review the state of implementation of the new urban agenda. And that's a critical moment in which you can make a difference. You can say, you can state, you can highlight the key areas that you think are needed to implement the new urban agenda and the SDGs. So 2022 will be an opportunity to renew commitments, define priorities to build back better after the pandemic, while addressing the climate crisis, the peace and security crisis, as well as issues of inequalities. So in 2022, hopefully we'll have the 11th session of the World Urban Forum in Poland, in Katowice, at the end of June, and with the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in the continent, in the African continent in this year. So these are 3 key moments to reflect on the new urban agenda and the role of women in the implementation, in forging the city we need towards the implementation of the 2030 development agenda. So under the banner of the World Urban Campaign, or UN Habitat Global Platform that is now made of more than 200 committed organizations dedicated to urban issues, The City We Need Now action campaign will help reflect and engage on the new urban agenda by asking, what is a city you need? How can we better, can we have better cities that we need now and soon, if possible now? That's why this year we are saying the city we need now. This is the slogan. It is to know the urgency of addressing better cities. We will extract solutions this year and recommendation to finalize the City We Need manifesto, looking at health, safety, planning, services, all areas to build better cities and communities. So tomorrow we'll have a meeting of the drafting committee, and in the weeks to come before the high-level meeting, we will finalize that manifesto, provide inputs towards the high-level meeting. So we'd like to, this is a call for all of you to contribute, to forge, to show how women can forge the city we need and provide your input towards the high-level meeting. So let me end here by recognizing the resilience, strength, and determination of women in these 2 days as we celebrate the International Women's Day. This UTC was a great way to advocate again for the recognition of gender equality and women empowerment toward the city we need now. I think we can make a difference together to leave no one, no place, and no woman or girl behind. Thank you all. Thank you, Eleanor. Over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And I think that really helps kind of organize, you know, why we're here for the Urban Thinkers Campus as well, and showing where the information can go from this. So that's really wonderful. I appreciate that. Okay, our next speaker is someone who's been here with us the whole time and actually organized all of this. So Ilda Cordero is the program manager for Urban Economy Forum. And yes, I'll read your information here too, Ilda. Ilda has a master's degree in environmental studies with a specialty in urban planning and sustainable development. Ilda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Thank you. I'd like to say that cities have a key role to play in promoting gender equality, and more specifically, the empowerment of women and girls to be active members in all of society's functions. This is critical to achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Women have been historically excluded from city building, which have led to significant gender gaps and inequalities. Using a multi-focused gender lens, these gaps can be understood and addressed for a more women-friendly city moving forward. Understanding the needs of women and their empowerment requires the use of a feminist perspective in urban design and planning. It is imperative for women to be involved in all stages of development, from decision-making to implementation to policy-making. The need for a paradigm shift from a male-centric urban development model to a gender-inclusive one is the key to designing cities that are safe, inclusive, just, resilient, and sustainable. When women and girls are given equal opportunities to succeed, they can be powerful agents of change to improve the quality of life for their families and communities worldwide. I want to take this opportunity to thank all participants for your input and proposed recommendations to move forward the new urban agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular in regards to SDG 11, Sustainable and Communities, and SDG 5, Gender Equality. Your recommendations will be included in a report that UEF will submit to the World Urban Campaign Secretariat at UN Habitat, who in turn will present at the World Urban Forum 11 in late June 2022. In addition, we are going to be implementing a global secretariat on women and urban urban SDGs under the umbrella of the Pavilion at Urban Economy Forum. The Pavilion is a knowledge exchange hub to promote peer-to-peer learning, and the sharing of wise practices in inclusive, equitable, and sustainable urbanization. Within the pavilion, the sub-program Canada Women in Urban SDGs is being established to promote leadership in creating inclusive cities by mainstreaming women and girls equality throughout all cities, rural areas, towns, and settlements. And lastly, I would like to thank Eleanor for moderating our two-day event. We are deeply indebted to you for this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ilda. Very kind of you. Okay, and our last speaker for our closing today is Anantha Krishnan, and he is the Secretary General for Urban Economy Forum. He has over 36 years experience working in international development with over 15 years at UNEP and UN Habitat in Nairobi, Kenya, where he was engaged in youth empowerment initiatives, policy and research, among many other projects. Welcome.
Thank you, Eleanor, for conducting a wonderful two-day event, which has inspired all of us. And so I just wanted to go back to remind us ourselves that this year's theme, gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow, is a theme for the International Women's Day. Of course, as mentioned by many speakers, it addresses the need for a paradigm change in infrastructure, systems, and frameworks that have been constructed largely in line with the male-defined culture. We need to find innovative ways of imagining and rebuilding the need to build a new world that works for everyone. So women decision makers in areas like urban design, transport, public services, as we have heard, can hasten women's access, prevent harassment and violence, and improve everyone's quality of life. So this is an occasion for us to rededicate ourselves on International Women's Day. So this year's theme also reminds us that women and girls continue to be subjected to grievances and vulnerabilities imposed by climate and conflicts, that they're also endowed with remarkable reserves of knowledge, resilience, and resourcefulness. Since women are key drivers of change as consumers, as decision makers, integrating gender equality is essential for a successful implementation, not the least of a circular economy, of which indigenous women have shown us the way historically. So as we all know that, we need to recognize that without the inclusion of half of the world's population, it's unlikely that solutions for a sustainable planet and a gender equal world in tomorrow will hardly be realized. So on this day, women are recognized for their achievements, contributions, and leadership roles. It is indeed worth making connections between this day and Urban Thinkers Campus with focus on North America and the origin of the day itself. As historically, you must have read that International Women's Day was first officially recognized by the UN in 1977. This year actually marks 174 years after the first calls for women's rights were raised in 1848, along with the Anti-Slavery Convention. So anti-slavery struggle and struggle for gender equality have gone together in many ways. The first time the day was celebrated in the US on February 28, 1909. So it is indeed befitting that we have today, focusing on North America, this day is being celebrated, marked by Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat. The UN says advancing gender equality in the context of climate crisis and disaster reduction is one of the greatest challenges. Yeah, the climate crisis actually has amplified existing gender inequalities and puts women's lives and livelihoods at risk. Despite being more dependent on these resources, they have less access to and often bear a disproportionate responsibility for securing food, water, and fuel. This again we heard in the past 2 days with examples and analysis. We also heard that the roles of custodians as custodians of culture, community, and cuisine have always been fallen on the shoulders of women. For this reason, it's important to continue examining the opportunities as well as constraints that empower women and girls to amplify their voices, to be equal players in decision making. So we also need to demand, it's not only important to celebrate, we need to demand enhanced global action. For now, as much as we're demanding for global action for climate change, with specific focus on financing gender just climate solutions, increasing women leadership in climate impacts and disasters, increasing use of data on gender equality and climate. So we also need to raise the voices and representation of women as in decision-making bodies. Even though involvement and participatory processes may look good on paper, their effective participation relies on strengthening women's rights. For example, in North America, in Canada and the US, gender parity is still a distant dream. For example, American cities, the level of feminization of mayoral positions in the country, it's only about 30%. And in Canada, it is about 30%. So all cities with no female councillors have male mayors. In Canada, only about 1/5 of the mayors are women, as I said. So here, what's important is knowledge. It is a process for liberation. The World Urban Pavilion, as Ilda mentioned, is a knowledge hub that will be a central element of its program, Gender and Urban SDGs. So no, actually, as you say, without knowledge, nothing can be achieved, including gender equality. Hence, the Canada Women Gender SDGs program and the establishment of Global Secretariat will take us a long way in understanding, in exchanging knowledge, resources, and good practices. Melinda Gates, I think it was in 2003, said some years ago, while talking about how powerful voices help women in the US articulate their goals and identify the obstacles, she said, a woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman, but the search for that voice can be difficult. But the pavilion actually aims to facilitate this voice to be heard globally, jointly with UN Habitat and all of you here together and the Canadian government. Again, I would like to thank wholeheartedly Eleanor's contributions, and not the least that of Ilda, Fazile, Ozan, and rest of the Secretariat. Thank you very much, and the day will continue. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So it is to me to say these last final words, and I don't think I have words to quite capture what went on these last 2 days. I leave here inspired, and I hope many of you do as well. I just like yesterday, I leave here thinking about things a little differently than I did before the day started. I feel like my emotions have been torn all over the place, from like inspiration to like heartbreak with trauma conversation. And I just definitely inspired to action. And, you know, Ilda has laid out nicely, and Christine as well, to where the outcomes of our work over the last 2 days will ultimately be seen. So I want to thank you for participating down to the very last minute. Good for you, you made it. It's a lot to sit through this much time in front of a screen, but I hope you'll find that it was definitely worth it. And I look forward to the Global Pavilion and the Women's Secretariat and the further work that's going to happen across this country as a result of today. So thank you, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. And I hope you take care of yourselves and each other until we meet again. Take care.
Thank you. Happy International Women's Day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Christine.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.